but that 88 is pulling away.
Earnhardt, Johnson, Menard, Blaney, third-generation star Dale Earnhardt Jr. brings him to the flag. Checkered flag waving. It's over. It's Earnhardt. Earnhardt trying to cover all spots.
Oh, yeah! Good job, Junebug.
Dale Earnhardt Jr. Checkered flag at Talladega.
Why is this one so much fun? Because your grin told so many stories on your cool-down lap.
It's just real emotional. I haven't won here in a long time. It was my daddy's birthday a couple days ago. Just real emotional, man.
My ears growing.
And welcome to it in the Dale Jr. Race Preview Podcast with no Dale Jr. at the racetrack still, but we'll get into that. I am your host, John Justice. Glad to be with you once again this week. It'll be a shorter podcast this week, just simply because Dale Jr. still is not on the racetrack yet. And so we'll talk a little bit about the timeline. My speculation, at least last week, was somewhat correct, could come to fruition. We will certainly talk about that. There's a bunch of new gear up at the website at NASCAR.com and DaleJr.com that we'll talk about. And briefly, we'll discuss Jeff Gordon and his chances today. It is a milestone for Jeff. This would be his, or will be his 800th start. And you know what? Let me just go ahead. Let's do that. Let's cover the race preview portion of today's race preview podcast first, and then we'll talk a bit about Junior. Look, I'll be honest, I've been following Jeff, but last week with the rain delay, I had to come home from my show. My show's on 6 to 10, and I had to Pacific time, and I had to watch the race on delay. And because of that, I didn't have the opportunity to use the normal tools that I use when I watch the race. Usually I have a laptop up and I have Race View on. I have my iPad open with the Race View, the mobile Race View app. And I've been watching and listening to Jeff Gordon over the course of the past few races, filling in for Dale Jr. Not nearly as much fun, obviously, as listening to Dale Jr. I'm not as invested in it. I want to see the team do well. I want to see the car do well. But, Jeff hasn't really had a good couple of weeks worth of runs, to be honest. I expected him to be more competitive, and maybe that was naive on my part to think that was going to be the case with Jeff having been out of the race car for as long as he's been out of the race car this season, going into a new team, not working with Greg Ives. Jeff's a great driver, but when you look even at his last season, it wasn't like he was racking up a ton of wins last season, even though he was battling for the championship there at the end. So I think my expectations were a little bit too high on Jeff. But more to my point, I was able to just sit down and watch the race. And that's not to say that I don't do that, but again, usually I'm sort of jacked in doing that thing with my fingers. I got my headphones on, listening to the in-car audio. I'm paying attention to the lap times and the speeds of Dale Jr., or in this case, Jeff Gordon. And I couldn't do that because I was watching the race delayed. So I just sat down and just watched the race coverage. And it was really, really refreshing. Not having my driver in the race, this was a real unique and fun way to watch the race, and I really enjoyed it. And so I'm going to take that approach again today when I watch the race at Watkins Glen. I think I'll probably have Jeff Gordon in my ear, but I'm not going to follow nearly as close as I normally do. When I'm watching a race and Junior's running, I'm spending more time with my eyes on my monitors, watching Dale Jr. on the iPad or on the laptop, because I can see where he is running relative to the other cars on the track, obviously, because you can't see him on the TV 24/7. It almost becomes my virtual look at Junior. They used to have that years ago. DirecTV, for those that remember, actually had dedicated channels to the drivers. And at one point, they even had dedicated channels to the drivers with commentators. And then they got rid of that. And with, they had like a camera shot on the actual driver with the commentators. And then they got away from the commentators. And then they got away from the actual camera shot. And then all you ended up getting was just his in-car and audio on TV. And then they got rid of it altogether. So I do that in a more virtual way. But I'm actually looking forward to the race from that respect, because that's not to say that I'm going to go back to watching the TV coverage more when Dale Jr. comes back. But if Dale Jr.'s not running, and I can't follow my drivers every lap on the laptop and the computer, then you know what? I'm going to sit back and watch the coverage and the rest of the racing and just enjoy it for what it is. Today is Jeff Gordon's 800th start. In final practice, he did pull some pretty decent lap times. He was in the top 10. No top 10 lap averages, but it's tough to get a top 10 lap average at Watkins Glen or Sonoma because very few drivers run a consistent 10 laps. So his car seems good today. I think he has a shot at a top 5, all things considered. But again, I'm keeping my expectations in check right now as it relates to Jeff Gordon, and I'm really just going to sit back and just watch the race like I would an Xfinity or truck race. Just sit back and watch and enjoy. Now, Dale Jr. was at the racetrack this weekend. He needed to get out, he said. Amy was on vacation this weekend. His doctors are pushing him to do more to bring about the symptoms that he's been dealing with these concussion-like symptoms in an attempt to, I think, just kind of work through them. And according to Dale Jr., he said that he would basically, once his symptoms subside and he doesn't have symptoms anymore, then he will talk with his doctors about a timeline of when he can go back and race. And he even said that his desire was to get into a race car if NASCAR will allow him to lift the testing rules so he can take his race car to a track nearby in Charlotte and run for a day to see how he feels. Or he said he might even hop into a late model car to see how he feels. As it stands right now, he's missing today. We have an off week next week, and then we have Bristol. And Jeff Gordon is filling in this week, and we know for sure Bristol. So you've got all this week, and then we have a week off, and then you have another week in Bristol, and then you have another week in Michigan. Now, I predicted the soonest that Dale Jr. would return to the track would be Michigan. And I wasn't doing that, obviously, based off of Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s symptoms. I was doing that based off of safety. I didn't see, let's say, for instance, that Dale Jr.'s symptoms had subsided. I didn't see him getting into the car at Watkins Glen because that's just too precarious of a situation, because if you get in a wreck there's a chance that it could be a really bad one. And same thing kind of rings true for Bristol. Bristol can be a wreck fest and has been in years past. So if you're looking for a race for Dale Jr. to return, Michigan seems like a safe bet. So I was looking at it just from a sort of safety standpoint. So I think that is still in play, but I think what's more in play is Dale Jr. and his symptoms. I think the fact that he was at Watkins Glen this weekend is a good sign that he's doing better. He seemed to allude to the fact in the press conference that maybe his symptoms had subsided a bit. And he seemed to be more confident about that. I think the most important takeaway, at least for me as a fan, is that he has no intention to quit racing. He has no intention of retiring. He has no intention of quitting. And with that in mind, I'm cool with him waiting and to get himself better and, putting aside, obviously, the championship this season. There's, never say never. There's always a chance he can get in at Michigan or Darlington or Richmond and pull off a win and still be in the top 30 in points. But I'm just looking forward to him getting back into the race car and racing and being competitive. I'm not even thinking about, just from a fan's perspective, a selfish perspective, I'm not even thinking anymore about him competing for a championship. It changes the dynamic of the season because our driver isn't going to be able to compete for a championship. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be any less enjoyable because he's got a reason why he's not. It's not like he didn't make it on his own merits. And I think there's something to be said that maybe the team have been struggling on top of Hendrick Motorsports being behind the 8 ball in terms of speed compared to Joe Gibbs and Roush Racing. Perhaps his performance had been suffering because he was dealing with this and didn't understand it. So at this point, the soonest we could see him back on the track is Michigan. I would be shocked if he wasn't back in the car at Darlington, just because that Darlington race is such a special, unique race, especially with that Gray Ghost throwback paint scheme. So I think there's a good chance, given that he's feeling better, he could be back in the car in Michigan. And I think that there's a really good chance he'll be in that race car in Darlington. Let's talk a little bit of merchandise. Again, it's going to be a short podcast today just because we're getting close to race time and there's not a whole lot to discuss, but I hadn't been on NASCAR.com for a while just because we've been so focused on the podcast with Dale Jr. and his recovery, which, by the way, if you're not listening to the Dirty Mo Radio Dale Jr. download podcast every week, you are doing yourself a disservice. And also the Door Bumper Clear, which is just one of the best podcasts out there with Brett Griffin and TJ Majors. But the Dale Jr. download, he's commenting on that every single week. And last week's was spectacular. I've listened to it 3 times now, where Dale Jr. sat down and just talked for an hour. It was really, really insightful, good stuff. And again, just another confirmation of why and a reason why I'm such a huge fan of Dale Earnhardt Jr. So if you haven't gone to listen to that 1 hour sit down on Dirty Mo Radio, go do it after you're done listening to this podcast. Now, speaking of Darlington, on NASCAR.com, and these items are on DaleJr.com as well, they've got a bunch of new gear up. They have new T-shirts. They have some new stuff. They had some T-shirts already out for the Darlington Nationwide Insurance Gray Ghost throwback paint scheme, but they have even some more new designs available, really good-looking shirts. And I'm looking right here, and I may even buy this thing. It's so nice looking. I'm looking right here at this men's Dale Earnhardt Jr. red Exalta Gauge T-shirt. It's got the Solar Flare, I think this is the name they decided to call it. I still thought Big Stick was good. It looks like a Big Stick to me, but be that as it may. It's got Dale Jr.'s red, orange, and yellow car on the front of it. It just has some really, really cool graphics on it. The red on it really pops. It's a good-looking T-shirt. And side note, it's such a bummer. And again, understand what I'm saying. I'm not being insensitive. I'm just sort of adding on to the things that are the unintended consequences of Dale Jr. not being in the race car. He's running a bunch of these Exalta paint schemes over the course of the past few races with Jeff Gordon in the car, which makes sense. They were already scheduled to run that paint scheme, but it's just such a bummer that Dale Jr.'s not in the car because I think most fans associate, as they should, because it's the primary sponsor, Nationwide Insurance with Dale Jr., but I really like this Exalta red paint scheme, and it reminds me of when he ran that red number 8 Budweiser car. And so, again, unintended consequence, it's unfortunate that Dale Jr. isn't in the Exalta car right now because we could be getting used to seeing him in there and creating memories in that car. I know we'll still have opportunities, but again, just unintended consequences of Dale Jr. not being in the car, and it's got to be a bummer for the sponsorship too, right? So, new T-shirts available. There's a bunch of new Nationwide Insurance paint scheme, the blue and silver items available. There's vinyl banners. They've got the sail signs. Like if you're into tailgating, they have these really cool standee sails with Dale Jr.'s logo, the 88 on there. Really, really, I mean, these are the types of things that if I were out doing a lot of tailgating, I would definitely want to go and purchase. There are some tablecloths available. A lot of tailgating stuff, obviously, for the summer. Dale Jr. launched his True Timber Dale Jr. website. So there's a bunch, if you're into the camouflage stuff, there's a bunch of new items there as well. There's a Dale Earnhardt Jr. football available. A checkered flag, black Nationwide Children's Hospital t-shirt, if you like that Children's Hospital car. And a bunch of youth stuff's available on here as well. So if you haven't gone shopping and you want to support our driver via merchandise, now's a good time to do so because there's a lot of new items available, and mostly because I haven't been looking over the course of the past few weeks and I hadn't noticed there. So go on by either DaleJr.com or NASCAR.com and you can go and pick those up. And look, I'm going to wrap up the podcast there. I had kicked around the idea of not doing the podcast until Dale Jr. returned in the car. But no, I want to keep it updated. For those that expect it and listen to it every week, I'm so thankful. So I'll continue doing the podcast. I'll be taking a week off next week unless there's some breaking Dale Earnhardt Jr. news to share with you. I'm definitely going to take next week off just because it's an off week. But I'll be back for the Bristol race, absolutely. So thank you so much for checking out the podcast this week. Again, you can email me at any time, talkshownerd@gmail.com, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at John Justice, that's Jon. Subscribe on iTunes, find me on Facebook, and have yourself a fantastic race Sunday. Dale Jr., get better soon, man. I'm so glad to see you at the racetrack. Glad to see that it seems as if you're doing pretty well, even if you're not in the race car. We are all pulling for you. So get better, Dale Jr.